Little brother has taken control, shoveling dirt in every hole. Predators to condemn your soul, watching you and watching me. We're all connected but separated, misunderstood and so frustrated. A million armies of one have invaded, watching you and watching me. We live behind glass curtains and act like nothing's wrong. Soon you will belong. I know you're out there somewhere. We've watched you for so long. Wait for you to fall. We'll expose you all. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. The little brother wants to make headlines, be immortalized. Everyone's got an electric eye with the digital spies. They've watched you for so long. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. We the people have taken over. We the people are little brother, standing by to dethrone each other, watching you and watching me. Paranoid, the lens is our weapon, desensitized in our lust for attention, democratized by our voyeur obsessions, watching you and watching me. Slaves to perfection, don't let them project you as you are. Reveal your every flaw. I know you're out there somewhere. We've watched you for so long. Wait for you to fall. We'll expose you all. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. Little brother wants to make headlines, be immortalized. Everyone's got an electric eye with the digital spies. They've watched you for so long. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. Stay in line, don't make a mistake. We're watching. We watched you for so long. We wait for you to fall. We will expose you all. I know you're out there somewhere watching
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of this broadcast or podcast without the express written consent of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, or Spaced Out Radio Limited is strictly prohibited. Listener discretion is advised.
Game on!
Game on!
Are you experienced? From high atop the mountains of British Columbia to you, listening around the world, this is Spaced Out Radio with host Dave Scott.
Dave, oh Dave, are you playing with those Bigfoot and aliens again?
We're Superman and we're the only ones who can be strong, but we break on command 'cause women rule the world.
You can follow us on our website, spacedoutradio.com, on iTunes and TuneIn. Follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio, on Facebook at Spaced Out Radio Show, or on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show.
I'm just a fool for you. I will stop till I reach the top just to be there with you. The password is... Alright.
Hey, Mom, put down that pointy stick.
I'm such a lucky guy, 'cause after all this time, it's like the deeper I go, the deeper I fall.
Buckle up, space travelers. It's time to go for a ride on Spaced Out Radio. Mr. Bumblefoot, Dave is ready for liftoff.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Captain, prepare for launch.
Lucky guy, 'cause after all this time, it's like the deeper I go, the deeper I fall. The deeper I go, the deeper I fall. Yeah, the deeper I go, the deeper I fall. The deeper I go, the deeper I fall.
Good evening and welcome to Spaced Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott, and it's good to have you along for this new ride on this new week. Wherever you are in this great planet we like to call Earth, we are live right here in Uncle Jimbo's cabin, right here in the Great White North on this Monday night, early Tuesday morning if you're on the East Coast or over in Europe, even Australia. Let's welcome in everyone listening in on spacedoutradio.com, on Spreaker, on the United Public Radio Network, Renegade Talk Radio, the High Plains Talk Radio Network, and on Revolution Radio as we do this thing every night of the week, rocking in and out of every show, thanks to our resident guitar god, Mr. Ron Bumblefoot Thal, formerly of Guns N' Roses, currently of Art of Anarchy. Bumblefoot is the official sound of Spaced Out Radio. Hey, if you're a social media junkie and you want to give us a follow, you can do so on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio. Give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. On Instagram, you can follow me at Dave Scott, SOR. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. Find us on TuneIn. Download our shows from iTunes. And, of course, our website is spacedoutradio.com. Hey, if you want to take part in this show, because we don't take phone calls, you will have to sign into one of our chat rooms, either on Revolution Radio, on Spreaker, on the UPRN chat room, or on Facebook at the SOR Space Travelers Club. Or if you're on Twitter, just use the hashtag SpacedOutRadio. I will get to your questions in there as well. If you go to our website, it's time for you to sign up for the SOR Space Travelers Club. It's only $5 a month. And with that, your name gets entered into monthly prize draws. You get access to private group interviews, access to a special section on our website, and much more. Hey, we're going to give you a hell of a lot more than just access to our archives. While on our website, you can read up on my latest blog, check out Eric Markham's SOR Spacewire for your latest and weird news, and if you've had a sighting or an experience you can't explain, our researcher, Mike Schmidt, is waiting for you to fill out an SOR Sightlines report. We want to welcome in everyone listening in on our newest affiliate, Renegade Talk Radio out of Las Vegas. Yes, we are live in Sin City. We also want to thank everyone listening in on our affiliate, the United Public Radio Network on 107.7 FM in New Orleans, and their listeners from over 160 countries around the world. Good to have you along for the ride. And remember, if you're listening in on Revolution Radio, the Double R Machine is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Head on over to freedomslips.com and donate today. The out-of-body experience in astral traveling is something many people connected to their spiritual self and conscious try to accomplish. Why? Well, I'm going to be honest, I have no idea. Never done it myself, kind of scares me, and I sure don't know what it feels like, though. But for many, it's a way to get into being one with their higher self. Graham Nichols is our guest tonight. He's an author and the director of the Out-of-Body and Near-Death Experience Society in the United Kingdom. He's also, he had his first OBE in 1987. Since that time, he has combined cutting-edge technology and in-depth research to further develop his abilities. Graham first came to public attention as an installation artist exploring psychology and consciousness through specially designed technological environments, the largest of which was exhibited at London Science Museum in 2004. If you want to learn more, and I highly suggest you do, you head on over to Graham's website, grahamnichols.com. That's Nichols with 2 L's. We bring in Graham all the way from Estonia tonight. I guess for you, it's today, Graham. Welcome to Spaced Out Radio. How are you?
I'm great. Really nice to be here. Thank you.
It is very good to have you along for the ride as well, because we love getting into these topics. We really do. We talk probably way too much aliens and Bigfoot, but when it comes to out-of-body experience and astral travel, it's just something that is just so unique and so unknown. Let's learn a little bit about yourself. You said you had your first experience in 1987. Previous to that, did you know what it was all about, or what happened leading up to that event?
I was quite young in 1987, so I don't have too much memory of what was leading up to it. I'd had a few experiences of other, what you could call, I guess, paranormal type experiences when I was younger. Seeing an apparition when I was around 5 years old. Also maybe something along the lines of reincarnation type memories, things like that. So I had that alignment in myself, you could say, but I wasn't specifically focused on the out-of-body experience. And then in 1987, I had a series of a few brief out-of-body experiences. They didn't last long. They were just fleeting experiences. And really that was when I started to look more into it and find out that there was such a concept as out-of-body experiences. And that was really the beginning. I then spent 6 months learning how to induce them myself.
Was that something that you grew up having to find out on your own, or was it something that you could talk to your parents about growing up?
I pretty much was on my own. I came from a very working class, ordinary London family. There was no religion, as is the case with many British families. There was no interest in anything spiritual or alternative. So pretty much I had to go out there and find books, get things from the library. It was really going out there and researching as much as I could find. And that was how I slowly pieced together that there was an entire body of knowledge on the subject. And then by the time I was about 15, I managed to come across an esoteric lecturer in London who was teaching astral projection. And I basically became, I worked for him and he became like a mentor to me. So that was kind of essentially another stage in the process early on.
Having to do that on your own as a kid, and I'm going to say you're probably a teenager in 1987 or just starting your teenage years, how difficult was that for you? Because when you're experiencing something strange while heading into puberty, heading into your formative teenage years, which can be tough enough on their own, that had to be extremely difficult for you.
I think, especially from my background, like I said, it was a very ordinary, very working class background. The school I went to, people weren't very used to such concepts as out-of-body experiences and things like that. And at the beginning, I didn't hide what was happening to me. I didn't. I was just very open about it and described the kinds of things that were happening to my friends. So some people were actually quite fearful at the time. I was never particularly fearful in myself, though. I guess there's often an assumption that it was strange or particularly fearful for me. But I think that in many ways, because I'd had those experiences right from the beginning, the apparition and the sense of that I'd maybe lived before and things like that, I didn't feel particularly frightened or like there was anything unusual in a sense about these experiences. They seemed very much a continuation of what I'd already been experiencing to that point. And then when I met the esoteric lecturer, his name was Douglas Baker. When I worked with him, it cemented in a way that the fact that it seemed quite a normal thing to do somehow. I mean, it's funny looking back at it, but at the time it felt very normal because it's all I'd known. I was a young teenager, and my whole life there had been this dimension to what I was doing and to what I did in my life, which I guess wasn't there for many other people, but it still seemed quite key to my identity.
So going through into your late teenage years, into your 20s, were you developing this ability faster and faster? Were you researching almost all the time in between high school and possibly college courses? Or did you kind of push it away like most late teenagers, early 20s do because you want to establish your own personality and persona in life?
I was very much focused on the out-of-body experiences. I didn't push it away. I basically became more and more obsessed with the experience, with the research. I read pretty much every book that was available at the time, and just worked almost every day on developing it. I would work during the night at the time, and then during the day I would study these kinds of things and amassed a huge collection of books on the subject. So it was really my main focus, and pretty much has remained like that since. I've always had a real passion for this area, and it hasn't really altered that much in my life. It's one of the most fascinating things in the world in my eyes. So it's never really been a factor that I've felt that I've needed to go too much into something else. And the thing is, I think with something like this, it's so expansive and so multi-layered and so many questions that need to be answered and so much that hasn't even been touched upon, if you like. I think there's so many esoteric ideas out there that don't really have any basis to them, and they're probably no better than a lot of the religious ideas that we have. So really, I want to get beyond that, and I want to use more of a truth-based approach and try and actually find out what might really be going on, rather than just going with the assumptions of what people have believed for centuries, etc.
At what point did you start taking this seriously, Graham?
I guess I started becoming more scientific about it when I went to university. It started to bring me into contact with skeptics and people who were a bit more analytical about their way of thinking, and maybe didn't just accept these kinds of things on face value. So I think at that point I started to be more serious about my research and started to think, okay, I need to evaluate these things in a more objective way. Luckily, right from the beginning, I started to keep a diary of my experiences. So that was in about 1990 I started the diary. So I've got a consistent record of my experiences going from now back to 1990, basically. So that gives me a lot of data and a lot to work on and a lot to reference when I'm thinking about the experiences. And it's also a good way of overcoming the fallacies and the problems that people can get into because of confirmation bias or forgetting things or not remembering exactly how the experience was years later. I can go back to my diaries and I can check the facts of how the experience was at the time. So I think that's really when things got more serious. It was at the university time when I had to defend myself to some degree from the skeptics at university and tutors and things like that.
Did you find it easy to find information because you're doing this in a pre-internet world and you are studying your butt off? The internet is still new and innovative, heading into the 90s. We're all trying to figure it out and what it's going to bring for the future. So how did you do your studying? You must have spent a ton of time in the library.
I did spend a lot of time in the library. Also in London, I guess one of the advantages of growing up in London, there's a lot of great secondhand bookshops. There were two very close to me that had quite a good amount of esoteric books coming through because of I think certain areas of London have maybe a tradition of that. Where I grew up was not too far from the Theosophical Society, was not too far from some of the well-known places for occult meetings and different things like that. So the Steiner Society, there's all different, Swedenborg Society, there's all different places around central London that have these connections because, of course, someone like Emanuel Swedenborg, he also was someone who was having out-of-body experiences, and there's a society to him in central London as well. So I was coming into contact with all these different organisations and bookshops, and I would spend a lot of time in Watkins Books in central London, which is this, I think it's the largest book of its type in the UK. And it basically had a big secondhand section, and I would find old rare books on different things, and I would collect as much as I could. So it was pretty much I would work for the lecturer that I mentioned, and then the money that I earned I pretty much spent on books and research and learning more on the topic. But of course, most of what you read and most of what I read at the time doesn't have much basis in fact. It's different opinions, and I guess studying that stuff, even though I know all that information now, I don't take it at face value. I don't think that it's all correct. I think that it's just interesting in terms of the belief systems that might be out there. But I think that this area is completely in its infancy in terms of our understanding of what really might be going on. There's many people who claim to understand the experience, but I think when we get down into the science, there's very little understanding of what's really going on.
Did you enjoy learning about the history of astral travel, OBEs? Were you surprised to learn how much this had happened throughout history, or was that type of information hard to find?
I think the history is a little bit harder to find. There's people like Muldoon and Carrington from the sort of 1920s, 1930s. There's writings about astral projection in some of the occult literature, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and organizations like that. But I didn't come across that much in terms of historical information. Swedenborg, who I already mentioned, he was obviously having out-of-body experiences, but that term isn't used in any of the literature about him because that term wasn't really coined at that time, and he didn't use that term. He would just describe it as traveling to heaven or something of that description. So you had to read between the lines a lot, I think. When reading about maybe a shamanic journey, you would realize that that person was having a near-death experience or an out-of-body experience, and you could work out what they were actually describing. But often in the literature in various areas, they wouldn't use the term out-of-body experience. I think, which is probably good in some ways, because out-of-body experience can sometimes be possibly a misleading term, or a term that only focuses on one aspect of how the experience feels. Because, for example, many people, including me, it is more of a journey. It feels more like traveling somewhere. So just saying out of body sounds overly simplistic to some degree. So I think sometimes I feel we do need new terms, and I have been exploring that as well.
So getting to the historical side, when you look at the way that there wasn't that much information, did you find that maybe that was something that needed to be explored more, on how many people had experienced this over time? Or did you feel that maybe the history starts right now that we have this whole new wave in the 90s of internet information that can be posted?
I think the history is going to be more of a modern history. Like I said, I guess you can go back into the past and work out that different descriptions are referring to out-of-body experiences and things like that. But I think that we can pretty safely assume that the levels of out-of-body experience description are pretty consistent throughout history. If you look at the occurrences of it in fairly recent history, let's say the early part of the 20th century, and then compare that to the 19th century or the 18th or 17th, etc., it seems pretty much consistent. Once you start getting into the 17th century and eras like that, you have references in witchcraft. You have, again, it's veiled in religious belief and misinterpretation, probably by the church and the Inquisition and things like that. So it's often misunderstood in terms of the early writings. But you can read between the lines and see that, okay, there's references to what we would now probably call astral projection or out-of-body experiences. So, but I think now we very much have much more of a solid basis for looking at that, especially since people like Muldoon and Carrington, I think they were really the turning point in terms of talking about this subject in a more objective way and moving the whole topic forward. So I think from them forward, we're sort of coming up to 100 years of detailed information on the topic in that sense, since they wrote Projection of the Astral Body and the Phenomenon of Astral Projection.
I love learning about the history of things, and I guess that's why I'm focusing on this, because this whole genre of spirituality, of psychic ability, of the supernatural is quite new to me. I'm 43 years old. My experiences started 5.25 years ago. So when you have someone who is thrown into the mix, who is, say, in middle age and really doesn't understand, because I'm going to be honest with you, Graham, this totally killed my happily boring life. How do you take someone who already has a plethora of life experience and get them into believers or going where you need to teach them?
Oh, I'm not trying to turn anyone into a believer. Belief is the worst thing anyone can do, I think. I want people to look at evidence, and I want them to look at the basis of reality, and to just be open and explore that. But I'm very much a supporter of doing that in as scientific a way as possible. So I don't want anyone to believe anything. I leave that to religion. I want them to analyze and question, if that's what they want to do. My philosophy is very much, if someone comes to me and they want to learn how to do this and they want to explore, then that's very much something I can help with. The thing is, I guess as well, with my approach to teaching this kind of area or to practicing it, you don't need to believe anything. The thing is, if my philosophy is, if something is true, then it will become apparent anyway. I don't need to believe it; it will just show itself to be true. So one example of that is, well, if an out-of-body experience is real, I have an experience, and then I'm able to show in some way that I had an experience, at least to myself, or maybe verified experiences. I have examples of that we can talk about. Then that confirms that there's some validity to it. Then if you take that into the level of taking it more into the laboratory and looking at psychical research and things like that, then you get another layer of evidence and support for the existence of something like this. So that's kind of how I approach it. So, but if someone new is coming into the area, then I think that's what I would do. I would encourage them to look at the science, to not jump into the deep end of all the. There's so much. This is true in so many areas. There's so much misinformation and false information and all this kind of stuff on the internet, and even in books, etc. And I think that we need to go to the data, I think, in general, as best we can. And that way we start to get beyond what's just people's opinions and ideas, and start to get a better idea of what actually might be going on.
What is the religious belief on this, Graham?
I'm not sure I would call it religion. What do you mean? Are you asking me what would be the Christian belief?
Yeah, what would be the Christian belief? Because there's definitely religions out there who believe in things like astral travel. I believe the Hindu religion does, along with reincarnation. But the major Christian belief, because we all, for the most of us listening to this show, we are Westerners, and we all have been brought up one way or another in what our belief system should be.
I think that Christianity, in terms of the teachings, which we have to remember is a Middle Eastern religion, it's not Western, it's not European. I think that the basis of Christianity doesn't have really any problem with such a thing. There's nothing particularly against it, and the only reference in the Bible to these kinds of things is a reference where the figure, I'm thinking it's Job, but I'm not certain off the top of my head. But there's a sentence where one of the characters says he traveled to heaven. I'm not sure whether it was in body or out of body. That line is the only real reference to traveling somewhere out of body in the Bible, but it's obviously referencing someone traveling to heaven, possibly out of body, and makes no negative connection with that. It's essentially almost referenced in a positive sense. So the only reference we have suggests that there's no problem with it. So I think I don't see any issue with the idea of out-of-body experiences from a religious context. I know that a lot of religious people might reject out-of-body experiences for whatever reason, because it's their contemporary belief that it's somehow wrong, or it's been muddled up with other areas. But I think actually within their own doctrine, I don't think there's anything that specifically says anything against it. To me, it's just another form of experiencing, if you believe in such a thing, experiencing your soul directly, or your spirit, or whatever you want to call it. So that would be the context that I would see it within.
So let's get right into it then. Exactly what is an out-of-body experience?
Okay, well, we need to split that into two parts, really, because there's the first part of the definition of an out-of-body experience would be how you or I experience having an out-of-body experience. So that's like your personal experience. So that would be something like feeling that you are separate from your physical body in a sensory sense. So usually you'll be at a different location. So it could just be a few feet from your body. You could be floating. You could be looking back at yourself. That's a very classic description where you would be looking back at yourself floating from above. But it doesn't always take that format. You could be quite a distance from the body. My first initial brief out-of-body experiences that did happen spontaneously, but then I spent 6 months training myself to have my next experience. That first experience happened maybe half a mile from where my body was. So, and I don't remember any sense of exiting the body or anything like that. So it doesn't always follow a particular formula in how the experience will unfold. But what there is always a sense of is being a kind of autonomous spirit or autonomous self at a different location, and often traveling over a distance. So that's kind of how the experience feels. It's a feeling of being like a spirit, being away from your physical body, being able to see your physical body at times, moving around freely in this kind of floating way, or drifting, it kind of often feels like to me. So something like that, a feeling of existing like a spirit. Then if we take it to what is an out-of-body experience in terms of what is actually going on, well, then we have to say, on the one hand, you have philosophies like that it is some kind of soul, that we have this eternal soul, and the soul is coming out of the body temporarily, and it only permanently leaves the body at death. That would be more the spiritual, esoteric, religious kind of structure. Then we have what is happening now, which is more of the scientific frameworks where people are starting to think, well, is it something like an extended consciousness? Is it more that the mind is not localized within the brain? Maybe consciousness is actually filtered by the brain rather than actually consciousness arises from the brain. We still have this mystery of consciousness. They call it the hard problem of consciousness. It's still, we don't know how consciousness arises from brain matter. So if that's still a problem on that level, maybe some people have suggested maybe consciousness isn't actually dependent upon the brain, and maybe it's something bigger. There's different ideas, or for example, which is one model, if you like, that uses a quantum basis to this kind of idea that maybe the microtubules, the very low-level structures of cells, could be entangled on a quantum level, and that way we have an ability for consciousness to be not just localized to the brain. So there's lots of different models and ideas for what could be going on in terms of the science at the moment, but as with many things with science, we don't know yet. We're still exploring and investigating, and that's very much where I'm coming from. I don't have a set belief system or a set idea of what I think's going on. I want to follow the experiences, follow the information, and keep open and keep exploring and see what we can find and keep improving upon my understanding as I go, and hopefully that way get closer to the truth of what's actually going on.
So is there a big difference then between an out-of-body experience and astral traveling, or are they together as one?
I think astral travel is just a different terminology. What I would say is something like astral projection is the esoteric name for self-induced out-of-body experiences. That's pretty much how I would say most people look at it. There are differences of opinion, like with any definition or any term, but most people use the term astral projection to mean an intentional, self-induced out-of-body experience. So I guess you could say the practice of being an out-of-body experiencer in an intentional way is astral projection. That practice you could call astral projection.
How do we know when we have experienced it? Because for many people who may not buy into their spiritual self or their own consciousness and live a very mainstream life, they may not be as attentive as, say, people who are connected, or those who have a brain much like mine that just never seems to turn off. How do we know when it's happening?
That's not usually something that's too complicated to understand, because I think that when you have an out-body experience, it's pretty awe-inspiring and pretty powerful. My first out-of-body experience that I induced felt like a surge of electricity, almost like I'd been hit by a bolt of lightning, hit my body, not in a painful way, but I mean in terms of the strength of the energy, it was just completely overwhelming, but actually felt quite positive. It didn't feel painful, is what I'm trying to say. So this overwhelming feeling of energy rushed through my body. The next thing I was aware of was I was up above myself, looking back at my physical body. The whole room seemed to be sort of glowing with energy as well. So just from that brief experience that probably only lasted a few minutes, my whole worldview almost was changed from that moment, because it was so real and so different and so unlike anything else I'd ever experienced, that I had to say, well, this is something that I really want to investigate, and I want to understand, and I want to know about the nature of our world. So I think that's kind of something that you can't really just think that you didn't have, or that you can just brush under the carpet and say, okay, that's I didn't really have that, or that was a dream, or something like that. I tend to think if people think it's a dream, then they probably did have a dream.
Would lucid dreaming fall into play in that?
I don't really see much relationship with lucid dreaming. A lot of people do, but I actually think that's a mistake and a misconception. I think that an OBE can at times be initiated from a lucid dream. I don't think it's the best way to do it, but I think it can be done. But I think the problem is there's often a blurring between the two, or I've read descriptions that people call out-of-body experiences that began from lucid dreams, and to me it sounds more like they just continued to lucid dream. But that's, again, down to a matter of opinion. But my OBEs happen from a waking state, from more of a meditative state, or I guess you could call it light hypnosis, self-hypnosis, something along those lines. But I don't initiate them from sleep. So, yeah, the lucid dreaming approach is not my favoured method, and I think that it's a difficult thing to get into, because then you start to get this blurring between the two, because you've got people describing things which I don't know. They sound very dreamlike to me, and they're telling me that it's an out of body experience, and that can be. It's hard to know whether to say, okay, yes, that's what you had, or not. So I tend to focus more on the conscious experiences because they're more clearly defined and clearly out of body experiences, and don't seem to have these elements that the dreaming experiences have. They seem to be much more. My out of body experiences seem to be much more similar to the accounts in near-death experiences and things like that.
Well, let's talk about the correlation between OBEs and near-death experiences. A lot of people who die do recall leaving their body. Would you connect the two in that same way, or are they two totally different experiences?
No, I think that they are definitely related. I think that for me, when I read near-death experience accounts, it sounds very much like what I experience. I think that an out-of-body experience is a component of the near-death experience. Usually the near-death experience just goes further into the sort of afterlife or whatever reality that is, or whatever level that is that they start to experience. Those experiences seem to go a bit further into that level. Not always. I've had experiences of that level as well. So I think that the main thing is an out-of-body experience is a component of a near-death experience. A near-death experience has maybe a few extra components that you don't usually find in an out-of-body experience on its own, but an out-of-body experience is often or usually an aspect of a near-death experience. So that's how I look at it.
Do people still have the same pictures in their head as a near-death experience when they are maybe seeing relatives or former pets that have passed on, or former friends, or the whole experience of going through the tunnel? Is that the same thing that people are seeing during an OBE, or is it a completely different visual?
Those things can happen. They're not very common in out-of-body experiences. That's where the difference is. People having out-of-body experiences tend, and this isn't universal and this isn't true of even all of my experiences, but I'm saying in the majority of cases, you tend not to see deceased relatives and such people like that. But for example, one of my most powerful experiences was what Raymond Moody is calling a shared death experience, which is essentially where you personally don't die, but you have an out-of-body experience and you experience the dying process of someone else. It often happens with relatives. So, for example, a group of relatives will be seeing the death of, say, their brother or mother or something like that, a member of the family, and as they're sitting there, they see the person die, lift out of the body, go through a tunnel. They'll watch the whole thing, and sometimes the first account that Raymond Moody described was a woman who tried to resuscitate her mother, fell back exhausted after attempts to save her, and had an out-of-body experience and saw her mother floating there. They shared an experience, and the mother then continued on through a portal and disappeared. In my experience, I found myself in a misty, cloudy-looking, huge, vast expanse with no literal kind of landmarks or anything that you could identify. It was just this vast openness, and then maybe around 150 meters, something like that, from where I was, there was a group of around 100 people who were all gathered. They looked confused. Some of them seem to be having visions. I actually saw glimpses of some of the visions, which I now know. I didn't know this at the time. This happened in 1996. At the time, I didn't know, but these were life reviews. I was seeing glimpses or memories from these people's lives, and I watched as these memories moved around and people saw different elements of their lives. Some people seemed to go through the life review much quicker. They seemed to have much more positive experiences with it. And I remember, I think it was a woman, I can't be sure, but there was one at the sort of back of the group, one figure, and she sort of seemed to move off and then sort of disappear into the mist. And it seemed like some of them were moving on. It was like they were in this level of being in this misty, cloud-like environment. This seemed like the first stage, if you like, and then many of them began to move on. I remember they had a European appearance, some of them. I got the feeling that they were not English speaking. All of these things were sort of coming through to me. I have a very vivid image of one of the person's memories, which was of this very intense looking man with very sort of leathery skin and looked like a worker and someone who'd worked in the outside environment for his entire life. So I saw all of these glimpses in these people's memories, and then I slowly sort of drifted away as well and came back to my body. And then I don't remember the exact time scale, but very soon after, I saw the news on the television, and there was a report of a plane crash that had happened in an island that was part of Norway, and I discovered that basically 141 people, so pretty much exactly what I'd seen, had died in this plane crash, and they'd been workers and they were all Europeans. So it was almost like a verification, almost like a piece of evidence in this reality for what I'd seen in essentially another reality. So that's an example of a shared death experience.
I didn't know that you could see almost future-like events when going through this experience. You can, yeah. I wouldn't say that I've come across many examples of it myself either, only my own experiences. So, but the way I tend to look at it is we're dealing with something that's essentially a form of psychic ability. You're dealing with something that I think psychic abilities are probably interrelated to this. I think that probably with something like clairvoyance or remote viewing, is people often know that term these days. As you move through the process of developing that and taking it deeper, the further you go, the closer it becomes to a fully immersive experience. And when it becomes a fully immersive experience, then you're dealing with essentially an out-of-body experience. So I think that's kind of one way to look at it. And when you look at it like that, you realize that, oh, okay, if people have precognition, seeing the future, then why couldn't they have that kind of experience within the context of an out-of-body experience? So I would say that my first precognitive experience was the most powerful out-of-body experience I think I've ever had. It took place in 1999. I was at a meeting of a few friends. We'd hired a hall to do a sort of class in a very informal way. I was just teaching some friends essentially. I just developed a new technique that I still use to this day called the G technique, and I was showing it to a few of my friends and trying to get some feedback on it and things like that. So we were in this room. I was teaching this method,
And as I was teaching it, I wasn't really feeling the results that I developed the technique for, because it was designed to create this feeling of the body going into shutdown and the mind staying alert, which is essentially what you need to initiate an out-of-body experience. So I was teaching this methodology, nothing really was happening, and I was thinking, oh, okay, maybe this technique wasn't the way I envisioned it. And almost as soon as I thought that, I felt completely overwhelmed. I went down onto the ground just to get some stability. I didn't faint or anything. But I went to ground level just to sort of feel more stable. And as I did, I basically went into an out-of-body experience. I just, in a very intense way, just went straight out of body, was moving initially through a natural environment, saw like a kind of jungle type environment, or at least very, very natural, lots of leaves and plants and things like that, and maybe a stream. And I was moving through that environment, and then that seemed to break away. It was almost like that experience got torn or ripped, and then I found myself standing in Soho in central London, which was an area I knew well. I looked across to my right and I saw a restaurant that I was familiar with. I realized exactly where I was standing because I knew, as I say, I knew that area well. So I knew that I was on Old Compton Street, which is right in the center of Soho. And I was looking down from this point in the road. It's like two roads converge and it creates a sort of a very acute point, a sort of a little area that sort of juts out into the middle of the road. So I was standing on that point looking down the road, and then I saw an explosion burst out from the right hand side. I saw someone run past me. Everything seemed to turn to chaos, and I felt this emotional wave. So what you might have expected would have been like the force of the blast was actually like I felt force of emotion. It was like the anguish and the emotional state of the people that were in the bombing seemed to hit me in the chest. And as this feeling hit me in the chest, I came back, not really to my physical body, but I went into a kind of neutral state where I wasn't seeing or hearing anything. I was just in this void-like state. And I stayed in this state for a while. A few of the people who were in the room with me while this OBE was happening had obviously become aware that something was going on. So one of them, a man called Chris, had started to try and coax me out of this state. Another man, Lawrence, was also helping him. And they basically managed to sort of bring me out of this void experience that I was in. And then we went into a circle in the middle of the room, and I described exactly what I'd seen. I had this strong conviction that this was going to be a precognitive experience. So I just had this conviction. I don't know why, but I just was convinced that this was something that was going to happen. I described that to the people present. And then 5 days after that out-of-body experience, the actual event happened. There was a bombing on Old Compton Street, basically exactly where I'd seen it. So that was my first precognitive out-of-body experience, and I think it's very unique in the history of out-of-body experiences because it was also witnessed by 4 other people in the room while it actually happened. And so we had, and they all knew prior to the bombing that it was going to happen as well. So I think it stands as, in terms of the emotion, in terms of the intensity, and in terms of the verified nature of it, one of the most powerful experiences I've had.
We only have about 3.5 minutes before we go to break here. What do you tell the naysayers or the skeptics who say, oh, this is just your mind making things up?
I say that I focus on the science. It's not really about what anyone thinks. I focus on psychical research. That's why I've taken part in experiments with Rupert Sheldrake and Dean Radin and different scientists. I mean, my focus is on finding out what's going on. So it doesn't really matter to me what someone believes. I focus on science.
The reason why I ask that is there's a lot of people who may not have the name that you do in this field, Graham, who are belittled, ridiculed by their family, their friends, their coworkers, their parishioners. You know what I'm saying? And it's a very difficult thing for them to handle.
Sure. I think that on that level, I think the best thing that people can do is to look into the research. The research is on the side of the proponents. That's the word I prefer to believers. It's basically, if you actually look at the parapsychology, the research that's been going on for 130 something years, we find that the evidence for telepathy, the evidence for precognition, the evidence for out-of-body experiences have been researched less, but there's still evidence there for it. Near-death experiences as well. So if you put all of it together, there's actually a huge body of evidence supportive of these things. So I think that essentially the skeptics are like skeptics of evolution or something. I think the evidence is overwhelming, but certain people are always going to question it and undermine it, and they're entitled to their opinion, I think. But I think the best thing to do is to look at the data and then make your decision from there.
And that's something a lot of people are going to have to do, especially those like myself who've never experienced this, because there is a lot of science behind it. And we're going to get into the science behind this with Graham Nichols in hour number 2. We're also going to get to your questions as well, because I know they are stockpiling up, and I promise you I am looking. And, you know, Graham, my audience is very, very in tune with the topics of the night, and I know there's questions that they want me to get to, so we'll do that in hour number 2. If you want to visit Graham Nichols' website, it is grahamnichols.com. Nichols is spelled Nichols. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio. We'll be back right after this break.
Would you like to become one of our space travelers? All you have to do is click on the Space Travelers icon at spacedoutradio.com. For only $5 a month, you can get access to some great prizes, as well as private monthly shows, newsletters, and a members-only section on our website. Become a space traveler today.
Looking for news beyond the mainstream news? Head to spacedoutradio.com and check out the SOR Spacewire. This is Spaced Out Radio's Eric Markham, News Director for the SOR Spacewire. Daily, I will bring you intriguing stories and outlandish reports from what's going on around the world. UFO sightings, paranormal activity, conspiracies, alternative health, and so much more. And if you have news, email me at news@spacedoutradio.com.
Have you had an experience you can't explain? Had a run-in with ghosts, maybe Bigfoot, or seen lights in the sky? Hi, I'm Mike Schmidt from the SOR Sightlines. I'm here to investigate your sighting. Head to spacedoutradio.com and fill out a report on the Sightlines. All your information is 100% confidential, and I will help you figure out what you've been seeing. File your report, and let's find out the answers together.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. With their money-back guarantee and the many benefits, how can you afford not to get one? Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com for mind, body, and spirit, and expect a miracle.
Greetings, space travelers. I am Dave Cruz, host of Beyond the Strange Radio, live every Sunday evening, 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 10 p.m. Eastern. Each week, we have special guests and talk about paranormal, bizarre, and strange topics mainstream just won't touch. Look for us on the Spaced Out Radio website or go to beyondthestrange.com for more information. And remember, don't be a stranger, just be strange. Hasta.
Are you interested in advertising on Spaced Out Radio? Head to our website at spacedoutradio.com and click on our advertising tab. There, you will find an assortment of ways you can get your product out there with us, from radio commercials to banners and social media. Have a product you like our hosts to endorse? We can do that too. Visit spacedoutradio.com for more details.
Hi there. This is your medium, Joanna, from Spaced Out Weekend, 2 Mediums and a Large. I would love it if you would come and join us with host James Tyson every other Sunday on Spaced Out Weekend. Together, we will take your calls and your questions live. Our goal is to provide you with a positive outlook on deep questions that you may have. Questions regarding love, relationships, money, or whatever else is on your mind. Come and check us out at spacedoutradio.com.
The sounds of wood knocking in the forest, odd happenings right out of a fictional world. These are the reports I love. Hi there, this is author Ronald Murphy, and I would love it if you join me and Spaced Out Radio host Dave Scott the second Wednesday of every month on our journey into the unknown land of cryptozoology at spacedoutradio.com. From Mothman to Frogman and everything in between. Hey, they don't call me the crypto guru for nothing.
From British Columbia to Northern California, Pacific North Weird has Cascadia covered. Check out our feature videos at spacedoutradio.com, where I, Vincent Zunza, and my super sleuth partner Alexandra Sullivan track down the weird and strange stories from around the Pacific Northwest. From Bigfoot to Mel's Hole and everything in between. This is what makes life exciting. So why report the normal when we can report the Pacific North Weird right here at spacedoutradio.com.
Oh, there's only one way to rock. Loud and proud. In high definition. Radio 702 rocks. Las Vegas.
Every Saturday and Sunday night, as Dave Scott wanders aimlessly in the wilderness, you can come hang out with me, James Tyson, in Spaced Out Weekend. Starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, I'll take you along as we talk with some of the best experts in their fields. SpacedOutRadio.com is the place to find us. So sit down, relax, put your feet up, enjoy the topics like the paranormal, supernatural, intuitiveness, and so much more. Hope to see you there.
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Would you like to connect with us? Head to spacedoutradio.com for all your latest show info. And hit us up on Twitter using the hashtag SpacedOutRadio. Now, back to Dave Scott and SOR.
Welcome back to the second hour of Spaced Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott. Tomorrow night, we will have Sean David Morton with us. We're going to look at 2017 in a remote view. Normally, the second Tuesday of the month is for Samantha Mowat and the ET Experience. However, Samantha last week lost her father, and we are giving her the night off as we send her family and Samantha prayers for the loss in their family. So Samantha will be with us again in February. Tomorrow night, Sean David Morton, 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern time, right here at spacedoutradio.com. We want to thank everyone listening in on Revolution Radio. Remember, the Double R Machine is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Head on over to freedomslips.com and donate today. If you're listening in on Renegade Talk Radio out of Las Vegas, thank you. We're sending our love down to Sin City. And, of course, if you're listening in on the United Public Radio Network live on 107.7 FM in New Orleans and 160 countries around the world, it's good to have you along for the ride as well. Bill Cardwell has set the password in the SOR Space Travelers Club for tonight. Poikilothermism. Poikilothermism. He's always trying to tongue-tie me. He got me tonight. Last week I nailed them all. This week I'm not off to a good start. Thanks, Bill. Bill sets a password every single night for the SOR Space Travelers Club. Use it wisely. Remember our website, spacedoutradio.com. If you want to follow us on social media, you could do so on Twitter at spacedoutradio, and you can use the hashtag on Twitter hashtag spacedoutradio in order to communicate with us there during the show. You can listen to this program and others on our YouTube channel, tune us in on TuneIn, download the show on iTunes, and so much more. And when you're at our website, we have a plethora of features there for you as well, so make sure you check it out today. Graham Nichols is our guest tonight, and we are talking out-of-body experiences, astral travel. Graham's website is grahamnichols.com. Nichols spelt with 2 L's on the end. Welcome back, Graham.
Good to be back.
The science behind out-of-body experiences, is this something that the mainstream science takes very seriously, or is it still on that fine edge of whether or not they want to delve into this?
I think that the mainstream generally pretty much ignore it, or generally don't really look at parapsychology as a field in general. I think that there's maybe a professional taboo against the area. That's one level of what's going on. I think another level is people don't want to be ridiculed. They don't want to feel like they're stupid or something if they come out and talk about these kinds of things. For example, just recently I was reading about Sam Harris, the new atheist, who in his book, I forget which book it was, but in one of his books he mentioned that he felt the evidence for psychic abilities, or psi as it's generally referred to in parapsychology, that he felt that the evidence was strong for the subject, and he was attacked by nearly everyone else in the field for saying that. But the reality is, what he said was correct. When you look at the data, the evidence is strong, and I think that in some ways we're dealing with probably so much of an institutionalized viewpoint against these things since the Enlightenment and the early eras of science, that it's going to be a very, very slow process for that to change. I guess that's something that we'll just have to accept, but that is the way that it's going to be, I think. When you consider, for example, that the evidence against smoking, it took over 7,000 studies to be published before the mainstream admitted that smoking led to lung cancer, for example. So it's often the way in science that the body of evidence has to be ridiculously high at times before certain taboos or certain paradigms or certain attitudes can be overcome and things can move forward.
Do you see a day when mainstream science may take a more serious look at this study, considering there seems to be overwhelming fact that it does happen?
I think that it will be inevitable at some point, yeah. I think that probably the biggest stumbling block at the moment is it doesn't fit within the current understandings of how the universe works. And so essentially there's no known mechanism for something like an out-of-body experience or something like psychic abilities. So we have this problem of, because of that stops a lot of the mainstream scientists even looking at it, because they're like, well, if there's no mechanisms, no force in nature, there's no way that this could actually take place within the known laws of the universe, then why should we look at it? And to some degree, I think that's a valid argument. But at the same time, there's this body of evidence suggesting that there is something going on. So I think that there needs to be a balance between the two. I think if more people actually paid attention and there was more discussion, maybe we could start to move towards an understanding of what the mechanism might be. But I do think that at some point, if these things are real, which I think it's very difficult to see how my experiences or the experiences that I've seen in the laboratory, the research that I've taken part in, I've also organised psi research with Rupert Sheldrake, for example. So the research that I organised, we had many participants and we replicated the levels of telepathy in that particular study that you would find in Rupert Sheldrake's other research. So I was personally able to show and to see that there is good evidence for telepathy as one example. So what do you do with that? If that's just coincidence or something like that, which is what a lot of the skeptics will argue, or some of them will, that's one argument they put forward, then it becomes so statistically improbable at a certain point that it becomes irrational to actually dismiss it. So it's amusing in a way that the scientists are being the skeptics, and they're kind of moving into the world of the creationists and just denying the evidence, unfortunately.
Let's get to some questions from our audience, because I know they're building up. Spear in the Spaced Out Radio chat room on Spreaker is asking, Graham, what do you believe is the relation between astral travel and remote viewing?
As I was mentioning earlier, I think that they're on a kind of continuum. I think that you could describe remote viewing. I mean, remote viewing, I should define a little bit, because remote viewing is a protocol. It's a system of controlled clairvoyance. So what I'm actually talking about here is clairvoyance. I think that clairvoyance or visual psychical perception is, say, at one end of a spectrum. So the thing with something like clairvoyance or remote viewing is you're doing it while you're consciously aware, while you're essentially in a kind of dual consciousness. You're aware that, say, you're sitting in a room, you're drawing sketches of what you're seeing, so you're aware that you're physically there, you're in body, you're conscious of what you're doing, but at the same time you have these perceptions and you have non-local information coming into your mind. If you take that a little bit deeper, then I think you're starting to move towards something like a semi-out-of-body experience, or maybe a visionary experience, you could call it, or something like that. It's going a bit deeper. You take that deeper again, and you lose all sense of the physical body. You go into what essentially is an out-of-body experience. So my feeling on it is that you're dealing with a continuum. That on one end you've got just that gut feeling that something's going on. You might be walking down the street and you just have this instinct. That would be the sort of most basic level. And then at the other end, you've got something like a full near-death experience that includes even physical healing and things like that. So there's a spectrum of depth of the experience. But I think that all that we're really dealing with is how deeply you've essentially lost your sense of the physical body, how much the physical body has been taken out of the process, and your consciousness, your expanded awareness, if you like, your extended mind, how much that has become the central focus in the experience.
Let's get to hashtag Spaced Out Radio on Twitter. And Joe, we call him Canadian Joe around these parts. He goes, can out-of-body experiences be either a positive or negative experience?
Again, this is down to personal experience and personal opinions and things like that. I've never had what I would describe as a negative experience. I've the visionary experience of the future event that I mentioned. I mean, you could interpret that in some senses that it had that it was very emotional, and it was obviously a negative event that I saw, but the experience itself was not negative. It was actually a very transformative, very positive experience for me in terms of how it made me look at the world and ask questions about the nature of time and space and things like that. So in terms of, I've never had anything negative with it. And I think that, again, there are superstitions and there are beliefs that come essentially from the past that I don't think have very much basis. I have looked into it extensively, different ideas about negative entities and all these kinds of things, and I haven't found much support for any negativity ever coming from an out-of-body experience. So, you know, you hear some very basic sort of descriptions, and you also can hear of people who have misinterpretations. For example, they'll have sleep paralysis, which is where you wake up but you can't move and you're essentially still dreaming, but you think that you're awake. And you might see a figure in your room or things like that, but that's actually a form of dreaming. It's not an out-of-body experience. There are also experiences where people will have an out-of-body experience and they'll see a small black figure or something like that in their room, and they'll automatically assume that that's something negative. Whereas in my experience, someone that you know can often be seen as a dark figure. A shadowy figure is often essentially how out-of-body forms appear to each other. One of the people I was teaching a couple of years ago had an amazing out-of-body experience where he was able to meet his son, his small son, who was about 11, I think. He had an out-of-body experience. His son had his first ever out-of-body experience, and they met each other while out of body, and they both saw each other as humanoid shadow shapes. So he could have interpreted his own son as something negative if he just looked at that shadowy form and said, oh, that's a kind of dark shadow, therefore it must be something bad. So then he wouldn't have actually had the amazing experience with his son, and he would have logged that in his own belief system as being something negative. So I think we have to be very careful about how we interpret things as well.
Follow-up question from Canadian Joe, God of Thunder at hashtag Spaced Out Radio on Twitter. Can substances, for example, ayahuasca, induce an out-of-body experience?
I think that they're different experiences. I've never used any hallucinogens, and I don't use any drugs, including alcohol. So that's not my area or avenue for exploring this kind of thing. But from my study of the literature and discussions with many people who have explored that kind of area, to me, I would define them as different experiences. But again, it will depend on your definition. If in that experience you have some sense of not being physically human anymore, or not being in the body anymore in some way, well, you could say that is an out-of-body experience if you take the definition very loosely. But if you're talking about the type of out-of-body experience that I'm talking about, in the sense of more of an astral projection or a near-death experience type experience, then I don't think that the ayahuasca experiences or DMT experiences or the various other hallucinogens have the same elements that we would define as an out-of-body experience.
Do you recommend people to use hallucinogenics in order to enhance what they need spiritually? Because that seems to be a big play with a lot of spiritualists over the last 18 to 24 months.
Yeah, it's popular, but no, I don't recommend it. I recommend developing your own faculties and your own abilities, and taking that approach. That's my personal advice. Obviously, my attitude is everyone should do what they feel is correct for their own self. I agree with Graham Hancock in the sense of it should be about your own sovereign integrity, your own sovereign choice to do what you decide with your own consciousness. But at the same time, my personal ethos is I think that there is usually some kind of emotional or stability loss by taking the substance direction in terms of the person's personality, and or sometimes in terms of the direct impact. So it's a difficult one, and I've seen the horror stories as well, blindness and schizophrenia and things like that. So I think that people should take things in an informed way as well. There's often a very biased internet giving the impression that it's only ever positive and that it's just medicine and etc. etc. And I think that we need to be a bit more critically minded and objective than that. I think that obviously you've got the sort of anti-anything kind of world of the sort of government and things like that. I think that's not correct either. I think many people have positive and life-affirming and life-changing experiences through different plants and hallucinogens. But at the same time, I don't think that it's necessarily the best avenue if you want to have consistent and more controlled experiences.
Getting back to when we were discussing the near-death experience comparatively to the out-of-body experience, Canadian Joe, this is his third question in a row, is wondering if you still see the same life review or judgment that goes along with it.
In an out-of-body experience, do I see the life review? Like I said, those elements are not so common in an out-of-body experience. I haven't personally, I don't think, or not had like a full life review. No, I mean that's something I think that probably does only happen within the context of a near-death experience. But there are elements of the near-death experience that I have had, like, for example, going down a tunnel. I had an experience of going down a dark tunnel, which was surrounded by, it is the kind of sparks you get if you grind metal against metal. So these sort of fiery sparks coming off of, coming into the darkness. So a large tunnel, sparks around it, and going towards a light. In another tunnel experience, this was interesting as well in terms of the skeptics, actually, because in this second tunnel experience, I turned my head as I was going along the tunnel, or what I think was my head, but I looked across in the tunnel experience, and I was actually going through the tunnel sideways and looking at other figures. There were many other figures, and the tunnel was vast. It was like the largest hall or massive sort of open area that I've ever been in. And I remember looking across, and I could see all these, I can't even put a number on it, but so many figures all moving down this tunnel as well. But it was interesting because some of the arguments of the skeptics have been that the tunnel is caused by a deterioration of the peripheral vision, or that the tunnel is just a sort of optical effect that then becomes a hallucination. But because I was going along it sideways, that tunnel shape was actually not what I was seeing in my visual field. It was a tunnel because I could see that from looking even sideways, but but it didn't have that structure of the visual field. So it's kind of interesting on that level. But yes, I think that there are many elements in an out-of-body experience that are consistent with near-death experiences, but the actual dying part, the life review and the meeting the relatives, interestingly, doesn't show up in an out-of-body experience, and that I think is also quite a confirmation in a way that there's a difference between the dying experience and the life experience. Although, as I mentioned, you can have a shared death experience, they're very well established, but you're not actually dying yourself. So I think that you're not going to actually go that one stage further as the person who's actually dying will. It seems to stop at a certain point.
I got a pair of questions from Vivian here, and she is asking, Graham, how can I get past the excruciatingly loud roar in my ears so I can get on with astral travel?
Okay, well, I tend to call these things like noises, vibrations, the different sensations that people have. The one that most people know about is the vibrational state. That's the most common, but there are also others, such as the void state, as I call it. Also, these buzzing noises and rushing noises and things like that. Unfortunately, I call them transitional stages. So I think that what you're experiencing there is a transition from in-body awareness, or being in your normal sense of the world, looking at the world through your eyes, that kind of sense of being who you are. As you start to transition from that sense of being in the body to being out of the body, you get these shifts, these changes. Often that comes in the sense of the body feeling electrified, feeling vibrational sensations running through you, these kinds of things. Or it might be noises, buzzing, things like that in the ears. So unfortunately, it's a sign of how you personally are transitioning from in-body to out-of-body. The trick would be essentially to be able to keep going even with that noise, and to try to get beyond your awareness of the physical body. So it's a process that you have to train yourself to do, or maybe mask the sound in some way by using I've developed a technology called infraliminal sound, which is it's not binaural. People always assume it's a binaural beats thing, but it's actually a completely different thing that I developed, and that's specifically designed to develop the vibrational state. So you can also use something like a different kind of sound to mask the sound that's unhelpful. So, that sound would then help initiate the vibrations in the out-of-body experience.
Her follow-up question is, can one only see their tunnel just by looking at the ceiling in a mostly dark room? Because she can.
She can see a tunnel by looking
at the ceiling in a mostly dark room.
I think the thing to understand is not everyone's process and not everyone's experience is the same. There's no set, this is what people will see, this is how it will work. I think the thing with out-of-body experience is there are certain markers, you could say, but within that framework there's quite a spectrum of different types of things that people experience. As I mentioned, the most common first stage is vibrations and things like that, and then other people have buzzing, and other people have a sort of void, which is completely different. It's just like being in a blackness. So those are all early stages. Some people will feel like they're falling out of their body. Other people will feel like they're lifting out of their body. Other people will see tunnels. Other people will just find themselves at a different location. So some people will literally just get out of bed thinking that they're completely normal, and go to walk to the bathroom or something, and they go to open the door and their hand just goes through the door handle. So, you know, there's a real spectrum of how the experience unfolds. So if that's how you specifically see things, then I think you have to work with your own signs and symbols of how the experience opens up, and develop that, and maybe learn to understand what those things mean for you personally, or whether they are signals that you're close to an experience, things like that.
Let's get to a pair of questions from Eric, and before we do, we got a good compliment for you on Twitter at #SpacedOutRadio. Canadian Joe says you look a lot like Dave Murray from Iron Maiden. So, you know, us being metal guys around here, we really appreciate that.
Right, okay.
Eric Markham has a question for you, and he is asking, does the pineal gland have a role to play in astral travel or out-of-body experiences?
It might do. At this point, again, the research is a bit sketchy, but what we could say about the pineal gland, we know the pineal gland produces melatonin, which is responsible for day and night regulation, your sort of sense of your sort of body clock, if you like. And in darkness, so I often wear an eye mask, for example, to completely create total blackout, which will help with melatonin release. When I do that, and when I also eat foods and do practice that sort of increases melatonin levels, the levels of the likelihood of the experience can increase. So over the years of practice, I tend to think there is a relationship to melatonin. Some people think that the pineal also produces dimethyltryptamine. Again, there's this trend for wanting to put everything down to chemicals. I think that that's a mistake, because I think we're dealing with the whole of consciousness, and I don't think it's physical, probably. Something like dimethyltryptamine may well be an initiator. That could be, but again, we don't have much evidence for that. There's evidence that DMT exists within the brain of humans, but there's not much evidence that it's produced by the pineal. That's not confirmed as yet, but it seems likely, though. So I think this is probably the link with the pineal, and I know my colleague Anthony Peake, who looks into this kind of science in quite a lot of depth. He feels that there's a link with DMT and the pineal gland and things like that. I'm less convinced at this point. I'm open, but I need to see the data.
Let's move on to Eric's second question. Are flying dreams out-of-body experiences that we just don't have lucid control over?
I doubt it. As I mentioned earlier, I don't see too much link with dreams. I think that's a mistake as well. We try to categorize too many things together. I think we actually need to be very specific with definitions. I think this is really important, because I think that what we as human beings have a tendency to do is to say, oh, that looks a bit similar to that, therefore they're the same. And then we tend to sort of lose sight of actually what we're learning about, and develop misconceptions and things like that. So if people are interested in the dream out-of-body experience question, I wrote a whole article on it on my website, which has 17 different reasons why I think there's a fundamental difference between the two things. some of the most significant differences are in various different areas of research. For example, going right back to sort of decades ago, D. Scott Rogo did some research where he looked at brainwaves in dreaming, sleep, and compared the brainwaves to people having out-of-body experiences, and demonstrated that there was a clear difference between the two. That's also been seen in the research with people like Alex Tannis in the 1980s. So, and then right through to myself, the type of brainwaves that I have while having an out-of-body experience are not consistent with any form of sleep or dreaming. So I think that it doesn't make a lot of sense to sort of categorize those two things together. And that's just taking one of the points from the 17 points that I wrote in the article. So people should go to my website and have a look at that if they're interested.
Do you believe anybody can do this?
Anybody is a big statement, but I think pretty much anybody, as long as they have a positive attitude and will actually do the practice. I think, like with many practices or studies, the number one reason people fail at having out-of-body experiences is nothing to do with the methodologies or the practices or anything like that. It's to do with not doing the practices or methodologies. So actually, one of the focuses with my work, I also coach people in a one-on-one scenario, and the reason I like that as a way of training people is because I can, as a coach does in terms of if you're trying to get fit, I can also try and motivate people to keep them on track, because I think one of the things that people generally fall down on if they just try to do it from a book or something like that is that they're unable to keep the momentum going, and they try for a few days or maybe a week or something, and then they forget about it, which is like the New Year gym membership kind of situation where people want to get fit, they go to the gym, they're really positive about it, and a week or two later they've kind of forgotten about it. So it's important to have some kind of support structure if you're not particularly good at motivating yourself and things like that. So, but I think as long as those things are in place, I think pretty much anyone can learn if they put the time and the effort in, like I say.
Eric has a follow-up question here. Has anyone, to your knowledge, ever conducted an MRI or a CT scan while having a controlled out-of-body experience?
There was a recent piece of research, actually from Canada, as far as I remember, with a young woman who claimed to be able to induce out-of-body experiences in a consistent way. I'm not sure what type of scanner they used off the top of my head, but I'm sure if you search for Canadian study of out-of-body experience student, she was a student in a Canadian university, I'm pretty sure. You'll see what kind of scanning system they used. The only problem with that, again, with some of the science, especially when it's coming more from the skeptical perspective, they don't tend to worry too much about being precise with the definition. So exactly what her out-of-body experiences were like naturally and what she actually induces is not described in the research. So it's just assumed that what she says is an out-of-body experience, and it's kind of taken on face value. So my only apprehension, or not, my only issues with that study would be I would like to know exactly what her normal experiences are like, and then compare them to what happened when she was being monitored, etc. But yeah, I think that's the main one that's been done. It's usually more been EEG studies and things like that, but that's again another thing that needs to be done more. And I'm always volunteering to take part in these things, so maybe I'll get to do it at some point.
Let's get to a question from Elizabeth in the SOR Space Travelers Club. She is asking, Graham, do you remember your out-of-body experiences or your astral travels? And if so, how can I develop my ability to remember?
Yes, I remember them more vividly usually than my physical memories. From the statement of having trouble remembering them, I don't know. It's sort of suggestive to me that she's possibly taking the lucid dreaming approach, because obviously many people struggle to remember their dreams. So one way to improve upon that would be basically to learn to induce the experiences in a conscious way. So learn some conscious methodologies. My second book, Navigating the Out-of-Body Experience, has both dreaming and conscious methods in it. And I go very much into the more conscious methods in my courses as well. There's 2 courses on my website, a 5-week course and an 8-week course. Anthony Peake is also in the 8-week course, dealing with the theoretical side of things. So, but I would recommend maybe trying some conscious methods, or if she does want to focus on the dreaming type approaches, then maybe just write down things as soon as she wakes up, or record them on a dictaphone or something like that. You can also, keeping your eyes closed and not fully waking up when you wake up in the morning, and just talking into a dictaphone or something like that straight away is a good way of remembering more of what you dreamed, and not activating your analytical brain too much too quickly. So things like that. But without a bit more detail, it's hard to know exactly what she'd need to do. But I think probably that would be the best approach.
When someone wants to try this, I mean, there's so many different avenues that one can take. Does diet play a role in anything that people do regarding OBEs? Or is it strictly from within?
I think that because we are dealing with partly a physical process, you have to get into the right kind of trance type state, and the body has to be in a deep state of relaxation and things like that. I think that, of course, diet and what you do physically is going to have an effect. We know, for example, that stress levels will affect how well you sleep, or will affect how well you can relax. We know that if you've drunk lots of caffeine just before you try to go to sleep, probably for many people that's going to interfere with being able to relax and go to sleep. So what we do physically in terms of our diet and things like that do directly impact our state of mind and things like that. Those are very literal examples I gave, but another example is alcohol in studies has been shown to deaden alpha waves and things like that. So things have an effect on brain state as well as on your physiology and your levels of relaxation. So if you're trying to learn something, my whole approach with my courses and my books and etc., more holistic approach, I don't divide things up in the sense of you just lay down at the end of the day and try and do a technique for an hour, or you try to do a lucid dreaming method or something like that, and you pay no attention to it the rest of the time. That to me would be crazy, but that is what most people do. So my whole approach with my teaching is to say, let's take a more holistic approach. Let's look at diet. Let's look at levels of stress, lifestyle choices, all of these kinds of things. Let's look at how much focus and time is put into spiritual practices or to these different kinds of practices, and let's build a structure based around that. So that's kind of how in my second book, there's a profile in chapter 4, which basically encourages people to make a sort of a plan of themselves. What is your life like? What are your skills like? What are the things you like doing? What are the things you dislike doing, etc.? You build up a picture of yourself, and then from that you create something that is based upon you, rather than the one-size-fits-all approach that most books and methods take. So I think, you know, that's a really important thing to do, to sort of base it more upon yourself holistically. So in terms of diet, I think why not use the best possible option to give us the best possible chance, so I think someone who's really naturally gifted, diet's not going to make too much difference because they're already naturally gifted. I guess it's a bit like you get people who are naturally, we've all met them, they eat whatever they like and they look great and they look really fit, and you know, but they can live on burgers and fries every day. Most of us aren't like that. And I think this is the same with something like out-of-body experiences. So the thing to do is to create the best sort of option in terms of diet for the person individually, to give them the best chance. So I advocate a whole food, plant-based diet for this kind of practice, because scientifically it's shown to be the most beneficial diet for many, many different things, especially less stress on the body and those kinds of things. So by that I mean lots of greens, lots of fruit, lots of healthy whole foods, not processed things, not junk food, all that kind of stuff. I haven't eaten meat since 1992, and I've been vegan for over 11 years. So that's kind of my dietary setup now. But when I say vegan, I mean whole food, plant-based sources.
The reason why I asked about the diet is when I started getting into my own spiritual understanding, a couple of the people who were training me and teaching me in regards to opening up my third eye and to start accepting more of the lack of a better term, psychic knowledge or intuitive knowledge into myself, was the fact that they had brought up that diet is such an important part, especially giving up meat. The idea behind giving up meat, according to my friends who taught me, was that when you're eating meat and you're trying to go on a spiritual journey, you can actually feel the animal. You take over the energy of the animal you are meeting. Is that just a little too far out there, or would you agree with that?
Possibly. I mean, I think the thing is we can make it even simpler than that. I mean, in order to be produced, it has to involve basically a high degree of control and oppression of that animal, and then it has to end in violence. And if we're focused on a kind of spiritual outlook, we simply don't need to do that. So why would we choose to? So taking it on that sort of ethical, spiritual perspective, then yes, there is a problem with that. There is an inherent contradiction in that, and you certainly don't need it for health. I mean, I'm living proof of that. So you know, I think that it's a difficult situation to try and justify that, I think, within a spiritual context, to continue to be a part of that use of animals. And yeah, I think obviously most of the sort of Eastern traditions, especially Hinduism, Jainism, those kind of cultures have long had a tradition of non-violence and not using animals. But there's also different Western traditions of that as well. There's been some groups within Christian groups who've taken that perspective as well. Some of the Quakers, for example, the historical peace churches have been vegans or different forms of plant eaters at different points. Leo Tolstoy, for example, who was an anarchist Christian, he also had a complete non-violence philosophy and became vegetarian, etc. So I do think on a spiritual level, a more subjective level, of course, but beyond that, I think it definitely makes sense within the context of all this kind of work. And also, it's an ethical thing. I mean, just because we've always done something doesn't mean that we should continue to always do it. We've changed lots of things about human behavior because they were abhorrent to us when we really thought about what was going on, and we just don't need to do those levels of violence and the harm to the environment that the animal agricultural industry does as well. There's so many levels to it. Human health, we've got heart disease, diabetes, cancer at epidemic levels in most of the Western world, and these are directly linked to animal foods. So I think, if people really want to develop spiritually, physically, and ethically, then it's the right choice, really.
What about people who are ingesting GMOs? They're playing with our food. How does not having proper organic food affect the spirituality of an OBE, an NDE, or even astral traveling?
I don't know what the effect of sort of GMOs and things like that would be. Where I am in Europe, we don't really have GMOs. It's not the same sort of situation as in the US and other parts of the world. I think it's probably just best to be on the side of caution with things like that. But I don't know of any direct way I could really say what effect it has. But there's definitely negative effects from a combination of lifestyle factors, we can say, and I think it's I definitely advocate a more health-based, wellness-based kind of approach to living, and to moving away from processed foods, sugary foods, all these kinds of things that are kind of unhelpful to us. But again, the same with the other things I've talked about. I think we should go by the data, be evidence-based, look at what the data says about, the latest research into health and the benefits of different ways of living, etc. I think that's the way to go, because there's so many opinions out there that can actually be sort of completely wrong, and they can sound spiritual. For example, you hear a lot about things like breatharianism, which I'm not a fan of. I think that it's quite a negative concept because I don't believe that such a thing happens, really. So it's kind of contradictory to everything we know. And why is it spiritual to not be part of nature and to not it feels very, very anti-natural in a way. It feels very sort of puritanical in a sort of negative way to me, those kinds of attitudes. So I think there's a balance to be struck, and it needs to be sort of evidence-based.
Canadian Joe has a question for you at hashtag Spaced Out Radio on Twitter. He is asking, Graham, are there any data points is there any data that points to a difference in an induced out-of-body experience as opposed to a natural OBE?
As far as I know, that hasn't really been studied in any depth. In my own research, if the out of body experience is induced in a consistent way from a conscious state, it's very similar in all of the markers to a spontaneous out of body experience. So I haven't seen any clear differences with the students I've worked with over many years. The types of experiences they describe to me that they have through their training are pretty much the same types of experiences that I see in the literature as spontaneous out-of-body experiences. So I think from my own data, I can say that they're very similar, if not identical.
Getting back to the food source, we only got about 2.5 minutes left here before with the break. We got a lot of Canadians in here. We're wondering about bacon. Does this mean we have to give up our bacon in order to have a better spiritual experience? Because there's certain parts of an animal that, we're having a tough time with.
I guess the answer is yes.
Damn it. Damn you!
Yeah, I never had people talk a lot about bacon. I remember when I first went vegetarian, people used to say that they could never give up bacon. It wasn't really an issue for me. But then I remember now it's more common that people say, "Oh, I could never give up cheese" when they talk about veganism. But actually, it's very good vegan cheeses now, so it's not really an issue anymore.
But it's bacon, man. It's bacon.
Just remember, it's a dead pig.
I know. And I understand that. And trust me, I do feel bad about that. I do. But what if we rename bacon a plant or something? Oh.
You're talking to the wrong person.
I know. I'm not going to win this one, am I?
No.
Oh. It's killing me. But then again, I've literally had to go off meat here for a little bit, so for my own health. So, anyhow, we'll talk about that one later. We got 1 hour to go with Graham Nichols, our guest tonight. We're talking out-of-body experiences, astral traveling, and your questions and more going into hour number 3. If you want to check out Graham's website, I highly suggest you do. Go to GrahamNichols.com. Nichols is spelled NICHOLLS.com. It's a great site. And once again, check it out. You might even want to sign up for his course, because that would be kind of cool. That's something I'd like to take. We'll get more into Graham's course in hour number 3 as well. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio. I am your host, Dave Scott. We will be back right after this.
The SOR Sightlines is a place for you to find answers to your strange experiences. Hi there, this is Mike Schmidt. If you have had an encounter with ghosts, UFOs, Bigfoot, ETs, or anything else that doesn't make sense, head to spacedoutradio.com and file a Sightlines report. All information you give is 100% confidential, and I will personally help you find the answers you need. SOR Sightlines, your answers are a click away.
Greetings and salutations, space travelers, from the Chronicles of the Unknown team.
What is Chronicles of the Unknown? I keep hearing about this thing.
It's a new paranormal reality TV show based right here in beautiful British Columbia, Canada. Follow our team as we uncover claims of activity on the Caribou Gold Rush Trail. You can also follow us here every third Monday, where 2 members of our team will be available to answer your questions. We'll give you some equipment updates and some of our experiences on the road, right here on Spaced Out Radio.
Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski, lead investigator with U4Cop. On the final Monday of every month, you can listen to me and host Dave Scott on Spaced Out Radio's Strange Days. We're going to get to the heart of the matter when it comes to what's happening out there. People are seeing and experiencing things from ET contact to Bigfoot, and I want to hear about it. Your experiences are what we investigators need to help solve these unknown mysteries. So tune in at spacedoutradio.com to the final Monday of every month from Butch Wachowski's Strange Days.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. With their money-back guarantee and the many benefits, how can you afford not to get one? Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com for mind, body, and spirit, and expect a miracle.
This is your medium, Joanna, from Spaced Out Weekend, 2 mediums and a large. I would love it if you would come and join us with host James Tyson every other Sunday on Spaced Out Weekend. Together, we will take your calls and your questions live. Our goal is to provide you with a positive outlook on deep questions that you may have. Questions regarding love, relationships, money, or whatever else is on your mind. Come and check us out at spacedoutradio.com.
Have you checked out the SOR Spacewire at spacedoutradio.com yet? Every day we post the latest stories regarding the weird, strange, and completely unbelievable. From cryptid and UFO sightings to the conspiracy world, we tackle it all. Hi there, I'm Eric Markham, Space Out Radio's news director for the SOR Spacewire. And if you have a story, I want to hear it. Email me at news@spacedoutradio.com.
Patrolling the Pacific Northwest, we are always on the lookout for the strange and unassuming stories that real people are experiencing. Hi, I'm Vincent Zunza from Pacific North Weird. Me and Alexandra Sullivan have teamed to bring to you those odd stories that never seem to make it into the mainstream. Stories so weird that will leave you scratching your head wondering, is this real? It's as real as it gets with Pacific North Weird. You can watch our videos right here at spacedoutradio.com.
Become more intimate and interactive with Spaced Out Radio. Join our Space Travelers Club with your new membership. For $5 a month, we'll provide you with special access to the website, monthly prize draws from books to psychic readings, along with monthly newsletter, private interviews, and more. Sign up today to be part of Spaced Out Radio's experience.
Every month on Spaced Out Radio, we look into the deep and dark reports of cryptids roaming around the world with me, Rob Morphy, from Cryptopia.us. I would love it if you would join me and host Dave Scott as we delve into the most arcane stories and reports regarding creatures of the unknown. My job is to hunt down the details and bring the evidence forward to you. These aren't your regular Bigfoot stories I'm talking about either. You can find out more about crypto history at spacedoutradio.com.
Looking for a place to advertise at a very reasonable cost? Look no further than Spaced Out Radio. SpacedOutRadio.com has an advertising tab that you can click to check out our daily, weekly, and monthly packages to play on the radio, or our website including social media. From commercial spots to banners, we have it all. Check out our competitive pricing today.
You hear footsteps in the empty room above you. A rocking chair begins rocking by itself. Don't be afraid of the things that go bump in the night. Reach for Spirit Storybox, the iPhone app the Huffington Post UK called the only ghost hunting app you will ever need. Spirit Storybox. The spirits are telling their stories. Are you listening?
Strange creatures lurking in the night, the sounds of wood knocking in the forest, odd happenings right out of a fictional world. These are the reports I love. Hi there, this is author Ronald Murphy, and I would love it if you join me and Spaced Out Radio host Dave Scott the second Wednesday of every month on our journey into the unknown land of cryptozoology at spacedoutradio.com. From Mothman to Frogman and everything in between. Hey, they don't call me the crypto guru for nothing.
Did you know that Spaced Out Radio runs 7 days a week? Hi, it's James Tyson from Spaced Out Weekend. Every Saturday and Sunday night, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, you can join me and my guests for some great chatter about what's going on out in the universe, or even in that dark part of the basement you really don't want to go back into. Well, let's find the answers to your experiences together. So come on up to Uncle Jimbo's cabin on the weekend. For more information, look us up at spacedoutradio.com.
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio with Dave Scott. Follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and hashtag Spaced Out Radio, and on Facebook Spaced Out Radio Show. Now, back to the program.
A child grew up too fast, went running wild. Now we don't know who to pray to anymore.
Welcome back for the final hour of Spaced Out Radio tonight. Good to have you along for the ride. Tomorrow night on the show, Sean David Morton will be back with us. We are going to be talking a lot about 2017 and what's coming in the future. We'll get into some mysterious stuff as well. 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time. The second Tuesday of the month is usually set aside for Samantha Mowat's The E.T. Experience. However, Samantha lost her father last week, so we're giving her the night off as she mourns the loss of her father. And so I would love it, Spaced Out Radio listeners, if you could do me a favor. Let's send Samantha Mowat a lot of love, a lot of prayers, and some really good energy, because she could use it right now, and I thank you on behalf of her. We want to thank everyone listening in on the United Public Radio Network, live on 107.7 FM in New Orleans and over 160 countries around the world. Good to have you with us. Down in Las Vegas, yes, Sin City, we know we are tuned right in to what's going on down there, along with Renegade Talk Radio. We appreciate you coming along as well. And if you're listening in on Revolution Radio, remember, the Double R Machine is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Head on over to freedomslips.com, do us a favor, and donate today. Bill Cardwell has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. I'm a sucker for punishment, so I'm going to get to this again. Poikilothermism. Poikilothermism is your password. I think I got it. Don't know how to use it in a sentence, but that's what Bill does. He tries to throw me a wrench every now and again. That is your SOR Space Travelers Club. Bill sets it each and every night right here on the mighty SOR. Hey, if you want to follow us on social media and take part on Twitter, you can tweet me at hashtag, make that at Spaced Out Radio, and use the hashtag Spaced Out Radio as well. You give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. Follow us on Instagram, Dave Scott SOR. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. Tune us in on TuneIn and download this show and others on iTunes. And of course, our website is spacedoutradio.com. While there, we have a plethora of features for you, including joining the SOR Space Travelers Club. So make sure you do that for only $5 a month. Tonight we are talking astral traveling. We're talking out-of-body experiences. I have not had one. I'd like to know what it's like, but we got the expert, the main man when it comes to this, Graham Nichols. His website, grahamnichols.com. Graham, welcome back to the show.
Good to be back.
Love the fact that you're going the distance, my friend. Love the fact you're going the distance. This is just absolutely fantastic. I really do appreciate you doing this. A lot of people, in stories that I've heard with out-of-body experiences, astral travel, have had experiences with extraterrestrials. And knowing what we do on this show, I do have to ask you this. Have you ever had that experience with some sort of off-worlder as you've been in an out-of-body experience?
Not anything that I could say definitely that's what it was. I've had some experiences of what you could say were non-human intelligences of some description. So, but what I'm trying to say is I couldn't categorize what kind of non-human that was. Were they from a different level of reality, or were they from a different planet? Or that's very hard for me to know what category to put that into. Were they just an aspect of myself on some different level? You know, there's many sort of open questions with that. But in terms of life on another planet, I had one very interesting experience where I went to another planet. I'm not sure where it was in terms of the universe, etc. But I was in what was obviously a different planet, and I remember plant life. I didn't come into contact with intelligent life, but there seemed to be plant life on this planet, and there was I have a very vivid mental image of one of the plants that looked kind of like a succulent. It sort of looked like a kind of cactus with no spines, but kind of bent over like a big kind of leaf kind of thing. That's obviously life on another planet, but not maybe what you're hoping for, not the kind of intelligent life kind of thing. But I think that many people within the out-of-body experiences will come into contact with these kind of radiant beings of light and energy, and many people do interpret those as being like interdimensional or some kind of alien life, but maybe, there's just no way to actually categorize them in that context. But I have definitely encountered those kinds of beings, and I think that they're very common across every culture, that people experience these sort of energetic, I guess, guides is a common name. Some people would call them angels, some people would call them aliens. I don't know what their true nature is, but that's something that many people describe.
The reason why I ask is a lot of people who listen to this show, they have had ET experience, and including myself, where we're all trying to figure out what the heck is really causing this. Are we really seeing what we are seeing? Do you believe then that extraterrestrials can get into that spiritual realm?
I just can't answer that. I don't know is the honest answer to that. I don't know. I haven't had that extraterrestrial experience that you're referring to, so I don't have any personal experience of it to reference, really. And I think, as you said yourself, with the people out there trying to explore the experiences that have happened to them, from my reading, I mean, I'm not an expert on extraterrestrial side of things, but from my reading of what I have looked into, it can be a similar thing. There's many different theories about what exactly the nature of these beings are, whether they're positive, whether they're negative, whether they're from another planet, whether they're from another dimension, etc., etc. So to then take that a step further and say, okay, they operate on a non-physical level, it feels a bit like 1 + 1 = 11 or something. I just can't really say honestly.
Have you ever come across people who have had a lot of extraterrestrial experience on their astral traveling or OBE?
I haven't actually, no. I haven't come across too many people that have described that. One or two I can think of, but not many, no.
I have a question from the audience. This is from one of our newer listeners, Loretta. Well, at least she's new to the chat room. And it's always good to see a new face in there, especially when they get involved just like this. I love when that happens. Loretta is asking, have you ever had difficulty re-entering your body afterwards?
On a few very rare occasions, it can be difficult, but I think the real question is more turn that on its head, because what usually becomes the issue for most people is staying out longer. The difficulty is very rarely getting back into the body. Usually you're disappointed because the experience will bring you back to the body much quicker. So a good percentage of my training with people will be focused on extending the experience, teaching them to develop stability while out of the body so that the experience can last longer. So you can go from a few minutes to 20 minutes to longer experiences. So It's very rare that there's any difficulty with going back to the body, because I think our in-body perception is our default perception. It's our default sense of the world. And I think even to think of it in terms of something coming out of the body and then going back to the body quite possibly could be a mistake. I'm not convinced that's actually what's going on at all. As I was mentioning with the consciousness models of what could be going on, it could be more like you're just changing frequency, or you're tuning into a different set of sensory information that's coming from somewhere else. Or it could be that there's a kind of replica of you, but it's not literally like you're a kind of Russian doll that needs to slot back into a physical body. I think that's quite a simplistic, sort of outdated view of how the whole thing works. And I think, we're sort of moving to better models than that now.
Couple more questions from our audience, if you don't mind. This one comes from Brian, who has had astral traveling, lucid dreaming, and OBEs, and he is asking, Graham, have you ever traveled or flown through a white square opening with black borders during a lucid dream into another world? And would that be a portal? It has happened to him a few times while he was lucid.
I don't really lucid dream very often. I'm very bad at it. I've done it a handful of times. It's not something I'm skilled at. I focus on out-of-body experiences, but a portal with a square box with a border, I can't think of any experience that's similar to that. But I have passed through portals. Again, I think probably the look or particular way something unfolds might be very specific to the individual. So the fact that it's a square with a border might be specific to him. But portals in general, yeah, there are many situations where there seems to be an opening from one experience to another. I've had I used to, early on, I used to work quite a lot with tattva symbols, which, for example, are this way of inducing an OBE where you use a sort of symbol, just like a red triangle or a different coloured shape, and you'll focus on that, and then in your mind's eye, you see it dissolve and become like an opening, and then you pass through it. And I've worked with that kind of thing quite a lot, and it can be very interesting because it can initiate an out-of-body experience in an interesting way. In my second book, I developed that into a sort of three-dimensional version, and the three-dimensional version is even more powerful in inducing the experiences. But it takes some practice to get used to the mental trickery that you need to kind of hold that image in your mind. But yeah, as I was mentioning a few times, I think that a lot of these things, there are no universals with this. There are different subjective, personal images or structures to things. The actual experience itself can be very objective, but the triggers or the ways that you'll move from one place to another, or the way that your body will look, or lack of body. The body is only apparent in maybe 40% of out-of-body experiences. So, that means that 60% of people are experiencing something else, like a sphere or a point, or no sense of anything whatsoever. There'll be just like a 360 visual perception. So there's all kinds of different forms, and I think the way to think of it is our consciousness is creating a model of the data or the information or the perceptions that it's gaining, probably, and then it's putting that into some coherent structure that we can understand. And I think that's probably what's going on. And so the colors, the shapes, all of those things are the result of how that process happens, which can be quite unique to each individual.
Couple more questions here. This one from Eric. He is asking, what is the chance of coming back to find your body has been taken over?
I lost you then for a second. What is the chance of...
What is the chances of coming back to your body only to find it has been taken over?
Probably zero. I've never heard of that ever happening. Not one occurrence, personally.
And Mario has a question. While doing an out-of-body experience, is it possible to cut the cord and not return?
We're getting into the realm of the sort of superstitions here, I think. As I just mentioned, with the whole thing of coming back to the body, so the last question and this question have a sort of relationship. The thing of coming back to the body and finding it taken over is based on the idea that something is actually leaving the body and it's somehow left empty, and then something can jump in, which is this sort of Russian doll idea that I mentioned. The problem with that is, if you really think about it in a logical way, or you don't even have to be that logical, but if you think about it, does it really make sense that your body would be like an empty thing and then something can just come and jump into it? I think that out-of-body experiences are no different to something like a deep meditation or sending your consciousness into an expanded state. I don't think you're leaving your body completely empty like a shell. I think that you're expanding your awareness beyond it. So I think that's why things like that don't really make a lot of sense. That's a very sort of old-fashioned sort of idea. Like I was saying, that the Russian doll model doesn't really stand up. There's not really much evidence that that's the case. And I've never encountered anyone who claims that that's ever happened. And even if they did, I would, want to see some sort of proof that really did take place and wasn't just some hallucination that they had. But I've never even heard of a hallucination. So then the silver cord. The silver cord, again, is a bit of a superstition. People do make this very clear. They do sometimes see the silver cord. I've been misquoted before as saying the silver cord doesn't exist, in the sense of people don't see it. They do see it, but I think that it probably isn't real. I think that probably what's happening is it's just some kind of belief system, or it's some kind of feeling that you're that it makes you feel better or whatever. If you go back to some of the early literature, silver cords occurred maybe in around the level of around 10% of descriptions. The most recent research, it was down to about 2%. In my own research, it was zero occurrences of the silver cord in any of the descriptions. So I think the silver cord is something that was believed, and maybe because people believed in it, they would on occasion see it. But in actual fact, it's almost never seen. As I said, in the most recent study, it was zero. And I think the study before that, it was 2%, something along those lines. And that's if you go to the parapsychology, if you go to the actual science where they're doing the research, you'll find that that's the case. So again, if you read the more New Age esoteric literature, they'll talk about the silver cord all the time, and they'll assume that it's real and blah blah blah. But that's not my approach. I'm not interested in what people.
I think we just lost Graham. I think we just lost him. We'll try and get him back here momentarily, as Skype seems to be having a little bit of an issue right now as it is kicked on out. We're going to get Graham back here right now. Gotta love Skype when that happens. Let's get this thing going here again. It might be all these storms that people are having right now. We're going to try and get Graham back. Give me 2 seconds here. And that is not working. Graham, are you there? Can you hear me? We were just getting into some good stuff here. We're going to try this again. We'll try and get Graham back on. Oh, there's Graham right there. Graham, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Sorry, I seemed like we got cut off.
Yeah, Skype decided to go into one of its little glitches here.
Yes, it's not as good since Microsoft took over. It was better when it was pure Estonian.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I got to try and reconnect with the Revolution radio speaker here. So I'm going to quickly call you right back here. So give me like 2 seconds, okay?
Okay.
And for our listeners, we're just going to reconnect with absolutely everything back here momentarily as we try and get everything back moving the way it is supposed to on this show. Sometimes it's a little bit of a pain in the butt. This Skype thing drives me crazy. There we go. We got back on Revolution Radio. We're still with UPRN and Renegade Talk Radio as well. Now we'll get Graham Nichols back in here along the lines as he connects up with us here momentarily. Graham, are you there?
I am, yes.
There we go. I apologize about that. I do. Sometimes, like you said, Skype can be a little bit of a pain in the butt sometimes. But it's got an ego. Let's be honest. It's got an ego. But that's okay. You were speaking right before the break in regards to the experiences people have. I would love to get into some of the experiences that you have dealt with. But first, I want to get to one more question, and this is from Bill in the SOR Space Travelers Club. He is asking you, Graham, I have heard that some people report some beings that can interrupt your astral body and try and cause you harm. Is this true?
No. I don't believe in astral bodies or silver cords or demons or negative stuff. I take it as we're dealing with something much more inherent to human consciousness, and I take everything from a scientific approach that we need to find out what's going on. And things like astral bodies originates in ideas like theosophy, where they talked about the etheric body, the causal body, the astral body, etc. I took the perspective that, okay, we need to establish whether any of these are actually true. At the time, etheric ideas of that we needed an ether to understand the nature of physics, ideas like that were very common. So that was just a popular concept at the time. Yet they've gone from theosophy into mainstream sort of New Age beliefs, and it's continued, and we now have a kind of sort of New Age religion of belief in these kinds of things. I think that we need to actually question that. Are they actually real? When we look at the evidence related to out-of-body experiences, do they suggest that there is an astral body? And the evidence actually suggests no. It suggests more that we're dealing with some kind of consciousness that is extended beyond the body. There hasn't been any real data showing any kind of physicality or any kind of set sense of a body. As you go through the process of having more out-of-body experiences and your sense of self breaks down, so you no longer identify strongly with the physical body, what happens is you lose this pattern, this structure of having a physical body in the experience. and you move more towards just being a kind of consciousness. Some people go straight even to being the kind of consciousness. As I mentioned, only about 40% of people even see a body. 40 to 60 depending on the study, but it's still, you're talking in the region of half of the people have something else. They don't experience a body at all. So we can't make assumptions that there is any kind of astral body or anything like that. I think we need to step outside of all of that stuff and actually kind of move forward and try and understand what really might be going on. I think one of the reasons to do that as well is because if we take a lot of the questions that have been asked now, a lot of the last few questions have all been based around fears to do with negative entities and negative things. That's really unhelpful and really harmful to someone who wants to learn to have this experience, because in over 30 years of having out-of-body experiences, I have not had a single experience that could go into that category. Yet it's one of the most common questions that people ask me. And that's very frustrating for me, because I find that we're dealing with this situation where there's all these belief systems that are just lies and rubbish, and it's just not true. And it just holds people back. I don't want people to be riddled with fears when they come to me. They should look at the out-of-body experience much the same as they look at meditation. It's a way of developing, it's a way of opening your consciousness, it's a way of expanding. There is nothing at all negative ever about the experience.
Let's talk about people's experiences and what they go through. Because I think for all of us who are on a very tight learning curve here tonight, Graham, we have no clue of what goes on. I would love it if you could share an experience or two with us.
Okay, well, I guess the experiences can range from very simple but also very beautiful through to completely cosmic and transformative. So I'll start with an experience that comes to mind that always reminds me of how beautiful the experience can be in its simplicity. It was an experience I had where I went to, well, basically during the day I'd been to the New Forest, a forested part of England, and we'd been travelling all day. We drove for hours to get back again. We did the whole trip in kind of one day, just went for the day, and I came back to London where I was living at the time, and I hit the bed, and almost as soon as I hit the bed, kind of exhausted after the day of travelling, I found myself just out of my body. I just went straight out of body, and then I found myself drifting over treetops. All I could see underneath was all these treetops, and I was basically back where I'd been during the day, watching all of the trees and the nature all around me. And then I descended down into a kind of clearing among the trees, and there was just a flower that sort of caught my attention as I was coming down, and I focused on it. And as I focused on it, I started to see into it rather than just the surface of it, and I could see all of the life moving through it, the sustenance, the fluids moving up and down the stem. I could see the sort of essence of the life of that plant. And it was a completely powerful, sort of moving, beautiful experience that I was just having, looking at a plant. Nothing dramatic, nothing particularly kind of transcendent in many ways, but it was so poignant and subtle and beautiful at the same time. So that's an example of something very simple that can be actually completely profound when experienced within the context of an out-of-body experience. Then on a more dramatic level, I've had experiences like a few years ago, I had an OBE where I found myself, again, I didn't really have a sense of leaving the body. I just found myself out of body, but I found myself in the upper atmosphere of the Earth. And I was looking down at the curvature of the Earth. I could see the Earth rotating. I could see the upper atmosphere kind of moving into the distance. I could see what seemed like the slight rotation. I could see the continents. I could see the rich blue of the kind of oceans. I could see so much just from this vantage point, and I was just kind of hanging there in the atmosphere, like in space, with this sense of this huge expanse of darkness of space behind me. And again, completely stunning and emotional and powerful experience to be to essentially be outside of the planet, to go into space, to have that experience, which in many senses we think that we need rockets and spacesuits and things like that to have an experience like that, to be somewhere like that. But in a sense, if we take control of our own ability to have these experiences, we can directly experience something like that in that way. Then I mentioned things like the shared death experience, or experiences that seem to confirm the afterlife. So I've had another example of that. Was a kind of Summerland kind of environment. You've probably heard that in many cultures and many near-death experiences, people will describe going to the first level that they go to is this really beautiful, stunning environment of natural beauty. And in one experience where I did feel that I was leaving my body, I came out of my body, went up in sort of, it felt like I went from this reality, and this reality sort of peeled away, and I just drifted into this other reality. And the next thing I saw is kind of grass that again had this sort of intense light radiating from it. All the greens and all the colours and the blues and the reds and everything was super vivid. It was like way beyond anything I've ever seen with my physical eyes. So the colours were beyond that, but also this sense of light. Everything was alive. Everything had light. And I was in the most beautiful nature that you've ever seen, essentially. And there were figures, people. I remember by a stream, there were some figures, and they seemed to have been people who'd passed over. They looked like auric. Their forms were, they had no skin or clothes or anything like that. They just seemed to be sort of energy, like auric forms, like colours, and things like that. And but they did. We seemed to communicate in a kind of telepathic way, and there was this sense that they'd passed over and that they were on that kind of level. Really subjective experience. I can't verify that one in any sense, but that's an example of those kind of other types of levels. And then I guess finally, to bring it back to reality a little bit, then there's the more sort of solid verified experiences. One fairly recent one of that I had in Tallinn was where I was able to come out of body. I remember the process of coming out of body. I went out of the window. I went up over one of the churches that's near to where I was living at the time in Tallinn. And then I went into the main square, Town Hall Square, the main square of Tallinn. And I watched them setting up for Christmas, for the Christmas market. They were hoisting one of the fir tree into position for the Christmas celebrations and things like that. And I watched all of this from above, and then drifted over the old city. It's a medieval old city, UNESCO World Heritage Site where I live. And then I moved back to my physical body, and then I literally got straight up, got dressed, went out into the street and walked to the main square, and found that exactly what I'd seen was taking place at that exact moment. So I had like literal verification. So that's an example of the sort of more veridical, the more solid verified ones. So that's kind of a guide through the whole spectrum of amazing kinds of experiences, and then they can even go to this completely abstract, transcendent experiences where you feel that you are connected with every mind or every consciousness in the universe. So they can be completely meditative and transformative, healing, all of those things as well.
Couple questions coming in from our audience regarding this, and that would be from Corey. You call the experience out of body. How does
it does not prove that there's an astral body. It just proves that there's perception at another location, which an expanded consciousness. For example, with remote viewing, people view things at a remote location, but they're not leaving the body when they do that. They're just psychically doing it. So that's not a contradiction to me. That means that their consciousness, their awareness is able to perceive things. An out-of-body experience could be a very immersive way of doing that. It could be something like a virtual reality experience. Some physicists think that our physical reality is a virtual reality. It feels to us like it's physical, but we all know that it's actually energy, that most of the world around us, the atoms, etc., are empty space. We know this from physics, yet we feel like everything is very solid. We can knock on the desk and say, this is solid, my body feels solid, etc., etc. But we know that isn't really the case. When we get down into the science, when we break through our assumptions, and I think that part of the spiritual practice of all things is to get beyond our assumptions, get beyond beliefs and things that may not be true, and try to get to the core of things, try to get to the truth. So that's how I look at it. So I don't categorically say there is or there isn't anything. There may well be an astral body, but at this point in time, I don't know for sure if that's the case.
Loretta has a question coming up here, and she is asking, Corey, have you ever experienced gatekeepers blocking your consciousness from expanding into certain realms?
No, I can't say I have.
Get to another question then from John on Twitter at #SpacedOutRadio. Graham, can you influence your heart and respiration rates when you meditate?
That's a good question. I don't know to what degree that's possible. I'd need to get someone to wire me up and to monitor that. I'm not sure without checking. I've never done an experiment on that, but that would be very interesting to know for sure. I'm very interested in all these kinds of experiments and doing things like that, and that's why I'm always very keen to get involved in parapsychology and things like that. A couple of years ago, I went to the Institute of Noetic Sciences in California and did an experiment with Dean Radin on affecting the quantum double slit experiment using only psychic ability, which had positive results. And that experiment was interesting because I like to take part in these things and actually see if I can directly have some kind of effect, or see if these things work within the laboratory. So it'd be very interesting to do something like that. I did contact Michael Persinger, who does research in Canada as well, and I was quite interested to work with him, but at that time he was more focused on remote viewing. But yeah, I find all of those kinds of things, those questions, really fascinating.
When it comes to meditation on how to get yourself prepared for this, could you walk us through what you do to prepare for an out-of-body experience, and that maybe it's easy enough for some of us to experience it as well?
Well, I think the process is a holistic one. As I mentioned, it's the mistake is to focus on techniques. I think the best advice I could give anyone listening to this show is not to focus on techniques. what most people do, I see this almost on a daily basis, is they want to learn to have an out-of-body experience, so they go online and they Google out-of-body techniques. They read somebody's technique and some description of someone who is successful at that particular technique, and then they'll start practicing it. A couple of weeks later, they're disheartened because they haven't got anywhere with it, and that's that. I think the reason for that is because techniques work when the technique is the correct technique for the individual. The selection process is what's key. It's not necessarily about the technique as such. It's about whether that technique's suited to you. I use an extremely simple process usually. Simply just focusing on a particular point in my room and then shifting my consciousness out of body, or shifting my awareness away from the physical body, getting out of my default body awareness. Now that's quite simple for me now after years and years and years of practice. But the difference between someone who can initiate the experiences quite consistently, and I don't claim to do it at will. I think that's a complete myth. That whole thing about doing it at will is very misleading to people as well, because it suggests that you can do it just like flipping a switch, and I don't think anyone does that. All of the major authors that I've spoken to, William Bjorman, all different people that I've encountered over the years, when you break it down, when you talk to them, when I say, do you do it like me, or do you do it, or is it like flipping a switch for you? And they'll say, I do it like you. It's more of a process. It's more of a finding the conditions, making sure that the conditions are conducive to the experience. So the first thing is selecting the right methodology for you. The other aspect of this more holistic approach that I take in my teaching is to do it in a way that you look at diet, you look at stress levels, you look at lifestyle, you include other new things, complementary practices. The way to think about it, if you're learning to be an athlete, you wouldn't just say you wanted to be a sprinter, you wouldn't just sprint all the time. Sprinters do weight training, they do other forms of exercises, they even do long distance running, they do different things as part of their training. It's the same with something like OBEs. You need to have complementary practices, and that's getting into something like meditation. My focus is I practice Zazen, or Soto Zen practice, no mind, still mind Zen meditation. That's the practice that I find helps me to gain a sort of calmness and stability and focus within what I'm doing. And that's the best methodology for me. It might not be the best methodology for everyone, but I definitely think that Zazen or Zen meditation is worth looking at in terms of the options for meditation. But yeah, I can't really cover everything, but yeah, my courses and my books, as well as the private tuition.
Do you find it takes a toll on your body?
No, I find the opposite. I find that it's a benefit. I find that for example, I just had a cold recently, and I calculated that it was the first time I'd had a cold in 5 years. So that gives you an idea. It gives you, I'm sure my diet and all of that helps as well, with the fact that, I last visited a doctor for any like condition in 1992 when I had food poisoning. So that gives you an idea of like my health level. I have no fillings in my teeth. I have almost perfect health. So when you put that into context, I think that the out-of-body experiences play a role in that. I think that they give me this increased energy. They're very healing. They're very they're almost, it's almost like if you believe in something like Reiki or those kinds of energies, Ki, Chi, Prana, those different kinds of energies, it's almost like an out-of-body experience is a way of directly connecting with those things. So I think that it's a healing experience.
When it comes to regular people who aren't used to this happening, how will they know the signals? What should they watch out for?
That's something that has to be worked with, I think, through like teaching. I'm not sure you can answer that in that way, because it's not generic. I can't give a generic answer for everyone, because it is different for different people. I mentioned earlier the transitional stages. They tend to have an electrical quality to them. People will just use words like electrical current, rushing, tingling, these kinds of words, buzzing. Things like that tend to be signs. But the thing to think of is, as you go through the process of inducing an experience, there's a breaking down of your sense of the body, and then you get these shifts in the body. You start to get a shifting, a vibrating, feeling that you're floating, a feeling that you no longer have a certain part of your body, etc., etc.
That has to be the oddest feeling. We're coming down to the final 7-8 minutes of the show. I would love it if you could introduce your teachings to the crowd on your courses, what they're about, how people can sign up for it.
Okay, well, the main I have 2 courses on my website, which are self-paced online courses that people can sign up for at any time. They're currently on 50% discount as well. The course is called the Navigator course. My second book is called Navigating the Out-of-Body Experience. So this is taking the book kind of as the manual, and the course is then takes all of that much further and into much more detail, and makes it much more specific for the individual, and also adds in what I've developed since the writing of the book over the last sort of 5 years or so. So the Navigator course, the first one is 5 weeks long, and it's purely based on the practicals. So that course is the sort of, if you really want to learn to get out of body quickly and effectively, that course is designed to teach you to do it over 5 weeks. So you do 1 class a week. It gives you a goal and a set of things to do each week, and you develop over that time scale. And that's the way that course is structured. It's based upon this holistic approach. It teaches you to understand the mechanisms behind all of the techniques, so that you're not just focused on taking a technique that you've read online or something, and you don't really understand what the process behind the technique is, what it's trying to do. Well, I go into a lot of detail in what the techniques are actually trying to achieve, what the mechanisms are, why they're designed in that particular way, what is their purpose. And then one of the good things about understanding that is then you can also refine the techniques for yourself. You can create your own technique. You can take my techniques, combine them together. So there's lots of approaches there. Then I also use this categorization with the techniques. So I use visual techniques, physical techniques, sound approaches like my infraliminal sound, which is a sound technology that helps you induce the out-of-body experience via the vibrational state. That's also available on my website. There's a link, infraliminal, on my website. And then also the dietary things and the more holistic approach in that sense as well. So I go into all the detail of that and recommend different resources and books and things on that level as well. So that's the sort of 5-week course. It's all very, very practically focused. Then if you want to learn more about the physics and the science as well as the practical, the 8-week course adds in extra lectures from Anthony Peake, who I think has been on your show, and he's more of a theoretical person. His whole basis is trying to work out what might be going on in terms of the physics and the science and those kinds of things. So he's also the author of The Outer Body Experience. So he's featured in the 8-week course. So you get me teaching you the techniques and the practical stuff 1 week, and then him teaching the theoretical stuff the other week. And with both the courses, you get access to them whenever you want, and you can rewatch them and watch them in different order if you want, and things like that. And they can be downloaded as well. So, but you can watch them on the streaming site and things like that. So that's basically the courses. And like I say, they're on 50% off. And I also do personal one-to-one training, which is probably my favorite way of teaching, because that way I can guide you with the specifics of what you need as a person. Like I said, everyone's different. Everyone has unique qualities. So it's important to understand the details of that person in order to get the best results. And also the online courses also come with support. So if people have questions and things like that, they can fire off a question as part of the course and get that answered as well. So it's interactive as well.
I want to slip in a couple more questions from our audience, if you don't mind, as time is winding down. This one comes from John at #SpacedOutRadio on Twitter. Graham, do you use any certain type of music or white noise to help you meditate?
Well, as I mentioned, I use infraliminal sound, which is my own technology that I developed many years ago by looking at my own brainwaves and then trying to affect my brainwaves with sound. I worked with a psychiatrist for a while and some other people to try and develop that, because I didn't have any success personally with things like binaural beats. They didn't do anything for me at all. They just made me feel kind of relaxed, but that was it. And I found that when I went into the vibrational state, the first stage of going into an out-of-body experience for me, I had certain brainwave patterns, which I then found that when we use different sounds, I could replicate that basic brain pattern, that brainwave, and help to induce the vibrational state. So I worked on that sound. Well, I started in 1998 with my first immersive structures. We didn't really talk about that, but I've also developed technology, virtual reality technology, immersive structures, and things like that early on. And the first one I built was a large-scale steel structure with a central platform that the person was suspended on. And that had an early form of the infraliminal sound in 1998. And I continued to develop it up until, I think the latest version is from 2011. So it's a big time frame that I've worked on that. And it has a very high success rate with inducing the vibrational state. It's in the kind of 90% level.
I got about 60 seconds for this next question. This one comes from Catherine. She is asking, while under an OBE, Graham, have you ever been in one location but then pulled or summoned into another location or white room?
I've definitely gone from one location to another. I mentioned in the Soho experience how I was in a natural foresty kind of environment, and then it split the experience kind of, and I was I guess pulled into a different location completely, into central London. Not a white room, but I've definitely been pulled into or shifted from one location to another.
Graham, thank you so much for being on Spaced Out Radio tonight. I really appreciate your time this evening here. Early morning for you. You hold on 1 second. I'm just going to wrap this thing up. If you're listening in on the Spaced Out Radio side, you hear Mr. Ron Bumblefoot Thal, formerly of Guns N' Roses, currently of Art of Anarchy, rocking us out. Bumblefoot brings us in and out of every show as the official music of the mighty SOR. We want to thank everyone listening in, no matter where you are, and the participation from our chatters in the chat room. Good to have you along with us tonight. Remember, you can catch this show and others on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show, on TuneIn at Spaced Out Radio, and on iTunes at Spaced Out Radio as well. Tomorrow night on the program, Sean David Morton, 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time. Thank you so much for being with us. Love having you all here. We will be here right in this hot seat in exactly 21 hours from now. Do us a favor. Tell a friend. Let's grow this 25,000 person audience. Help us out. You have a good one, everyone. We'll talk to you soon. Good night.